All right, welcome to the information evening on geoengineering. It's great to see we've got quite a good turnout and see a few familiar faces. So I hope that you can go away from this event informed and aware of exactly what's happening in our atmosphere. My name's Steve Fimmel. I'm a member of the Melbourne Against Chemtrails Facebook group, and Paul Mack is the leader of that group. He's at the back of the room, and he'll give us some good information later on, as well as lead to the question section. Just a little bit of housekeeping first before going further. We can't use these side doors. We'll need to use the doors which you probably came through, the back doors there, and toilets if you need to use them on the left on the way out. Okay, so I'll need that information. Got it. Now, with the subject matter tonight, what we intend to do is cover the subject matter fairly broadly and only go into certain areas in depth. So there will be a few times we'll go into more detail, but other than that, we're sort of going to try and spread the information fairly wide. And what we're going to do is give you a handout at the end that will enable you to go away and do your own research. So this really is just the beginning tonight to at least get you to a certain level of knowledge and understanding with respect to the geoengineering programs, and then you can run with the ball and take it as far as you want and research that information. Just before we start, I'd be interested to know, those that were here early enough to see the slides, did you notice anything unusual in the sky?
Just one or two.
What was the main feature, perhaps, of what you saw in the sky?
Streaks.
Streaks, yeah. That's right. And would you say that any of the cloud formations that you saw around those streaks, you weren't really taught about in science class? In other words, cumulus, nimbus, stratus, cirrus. That you saw some cloud formations there which didn't quite fit into any of those categories?
A new category.
New categories, and the science establishment really is trying to categorise these as official cloud formations. But anyway, it was interesting that you could observe that with those slides. We put it together, I guess, to just help set the scene, so that you know what's going on in Victoria, what's going on in Melbourne and Geelong. The last half dozen or so slides were the Geelong area being aerosol sprayed in the last couple of months. I think without anything further to do, really, we'll start the evening with a documentary film, which is about 20 to 25 minutes, and we'll take it from there. Then I'll give a presentation and go through some of the nuts and bolts of the geoengineering.
What I've decided to do is create a new form of media. It's an initiative-based documentary. You get the app, Skyder Alert, and when you see this taking place and something doesn't look right in the sky above, just take the picture. And it automatically will send to your appropriate congressman or legislator to look up, take the picture. The photos are evidence. We need participation. We need your help. This is an initiative-based documentary. It's not just a documentary that you can watch and think about. Get the app, go on the website, send us your photos. Let the lawmakers know that you're not okay with it. So what I came across in July through the stop motion time-lapse photography by accident was this aerosol spraying that has showed up to be a geoengineering type experiment or possible military activity on at least a US scale, possibly a global scale. It's not natural, the clouds are being manufactured. There's fallout from it, and it's washing down in the form of rain into the water and the soil, resulting in us drinking whatever the chemicals are in this aerosol spray, and the other byproduct, which is the global dimming, which is also disturbing. So whether it's a solar radiation management or geoengineering effort, there are absolute side effects and consequences that may actually be catastrophic.
An increasing amount of days saw these patterns occurring in the skies overhead and a subsequent diminishment of my solar uptake. And it increased with every year. So about 2004 is when I really started my investigation as to what could be happening in the skies above, because it was too inconsistent. One day would be a grid pattern, and another day would be virtually nothing, with very similar atmospheric conditions. I've been studying meteorology since the late 90s as well. So clearly there was something happening, and it took no time at all to come to the geoengineering issue and a mountain of data. I researched the subject of geoengineering, which seemed to describe exactly what I was seeing in the skies above, which was solar obscuration. That's the primary goal of SAG, Stratospheric Aerosol Geoengineering, and SRM, Solar Radiation Management. The primary goal of these patents, like stratospheric Wells box heating for reduction of global warming, is a primary patent, and the stated goal is to block the sun. And quite clearly, that's what was happening with my solar PV system. So seeing the first ingredient in that patent is aluminum, I began to do rain tests. The first test was 7 parts per billion, which according to a hydrogeologist was already quite high. Given my location, a filtered forested location, it's not near any sort of industry, urban setting, anything. Subsequent tests over the next 5 years escalated as much as 3,450 parts per billion of aluminum in a single rain test. So if you have virtually every dot connecting, and we know these materials aren't coming from China, that's the first thing many people state, but California Air Quality Resources Board has done studies on the aerosols from China, and aluminum simply is not amongst them. Metals don't float across oceans with the exception of mercury. Global dimming is a term most are not familiar with, and the latest figures show fully 20% of the sun's direct rays that reached the planet several decades ago no longer do. I mean, this is the biggest elephant in the room, absolutely the biggest in the room, and I believe that if it could be brought to a level where there was enough cover for all the scientists, all the meteorologists, all the biologists, all the academia that knows this is going on, I believe they would pour from every corner. I do, but they would have to have the cover, because I know people with California Department of Fish and Game that are absolutely beside themselves that this is going on.
Aerosol geoengineering looks like it is so cheap that the cost is basically not going to be an issue. That means that implementation decisions will be risk-to-risk decisions. The risk of doing it against the risk of not doing it. And it makes the problem of how we govern it fundamentally harder and different. But I think the more we do research, the less easy this will look. The more complicated the environmental effects will look. And that's a good thing, because right now it looks too easy. So I think that if we do more research, we're likely to find out that it's harder and more complicated than we thought, and the side effects are harder to manage. Of course, the opposite reaction is possible. It's an empirical question how people will actually react to knowledge about this. Another reaction is to say, if these crazy scientists are so concerned about putting CO2 in the atmosphere, they want to think about these things, then that might actually mean we should be more serious about the risks of CO2 in the atmosphere. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard, it's more like free riding on our grandkids. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard, it's more like free riding on our grandkids.
Numerous air quality studies, including from CARB, California Air Quality Resource Board, have named submicron-sized particulates as being particularly harmful for human respiration. Through all the discussions today, I have not heard any mention of this fallout, and has this been studied, and also the effects of a highly reactive metal like aluminum on toxifying soils and waters?
The collaborators of mine working on the aerosol scheme are actually folks from Carnegie Mellon who focused on human health impacts. And while we haven't published it, that was the very first thing we did, was do the order of magnitude calculation in a level pencil paper, but with an expert on human health impacts about whether there could be an issue. And from aluminum or other particles, there are a lot of toxicological things that need to get looked at seriously.
Geoengineers now are moving very quickly to get legislation passed to spray the primary ingredients into our sky, knowing the damage that we have had not only to human health, we've seen aluminum-related illnesses go through the roof, but what free-form aluminum oxide does to our environment is devastating, and it literally destroys crops, it destroys forests, it destroys our Earth. We have an Earth that is being molested. Our ozone layer is being shredded from top to bottom.
Contrails change the amount of sunlight and energy that pierces the atmosphere. It's in several articles that I can show you. So the phenomena of changing how much sun gets and energy gets into our atmosphere that heats it up is printed every day. It's just printed in such a way as to not say this is a tool for climate change. It's saying it is in fact a phenomena that will in fact change the climate by reducing the amount of sun that gets into our atmosphere. Geoengineering is one of the things that are on the table, and it'll probably be on a large enough scale that it'll be pretty obvious to everybody.
And it's becoming more obvious every day. Look at the way the contrails persist and become an entire white blanket over the whole sky. Look at this photograph of the sky. I thought that the clouds looked a little strange. Well, I took some pictures. But then when I saw a plane go through the cloud and leave a void in the cloud that lasted for half an hour or so. Planes don't leave holes in clouds. They're just not clouds.
When you begin to introduce clouds to the sky, you're changing how much energy from the sun reaches the Earth's surface. That's a given. You're increasing cloud cover. And we've had a marked increase of high cloud cover, in particular cirrus and alto-cumulus clouds over the last 30 years. The quotient, or the ratio between low clouds and high clouds, has nearly doubled the number of high clouds. And what you're doing is trapping heat. You're keeping some out, but when it comes to nighttime, you're pulling a blanket over. All right, let's just take a summer afternoon in LA. We have a high cloud bank come in. It won't come in the morning, it'll come in the afternoon. So we get all of that morning sunshine, we get all of that midday sunshine. The clouds come in, the sun begins to set in the west, the clouds thicken up. You've already got your heat in for the day. And then the clouds stick around for 70% of the night, and the heat stays. And so in late 2004, I started buying cameras. I bought 2 little webcams and then 2 other mini DV Canon cameras. Little tripods, stuck them out around the house. And then I bought 2 computers and time-lapse software. And so I could get north, south, southwest, and then east. I was hoping to catch movement of clouds, things happening with clouds so I could deliver better forecast at night. What I caught after 4 months in was in about 25 minutes, and I'll show it on the video, is a series of flights. And what happened was one plane was coming along, it was a relatively dry day in April. A plane would come along and only a little bit of the trail would stick. Only a part of it remained visible. What was curious is that another plane came along and hit precisely the middle of that segment. And I'm like, that's odd. And then another plane came along and hit the end at an angle, not bisecting or perpendicular, but off at an angle. And I thought, the light went off. There's something they're doing with geometry. It is establishing and setting up these resonances, these zones. Because what I had observed with the time-lapse camera is that the atmosphere had literally been layers. Each 2, 3, 4, 5, 8,000 feet is probably variable from day to day. And the clouds would come up and then literally be chopped off. But that would only happen after a plane had come through. And then the storm would collapse. And you can see it today. You can step out. Anytime you see thunderstorms beginning to go, the planes will be there. You know, so it all comes back to the sun. The sun is the power source for this solar system. The sun drives the weather.
In the fall of 1998, I was asked by my employer, Environment News Service, a worldwide wire service dealing with environmental issues, to have a look at a VHS videotape. When I viewed the tape, I started laughing, frankly. I thought, here's an hour and 10 minutes of shaky video footage of contrails. After 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, I stopped laughing because as a former pilot and ocean navigator, I was well familiar with normal contrails, and what I was seeing on this videotape was not acting like a normal condensation trail. The trails coming out behind multiple airplanes, instead of dissipating, were lingering, spreading across the sky until a blue sky day had turned into a milky, murky overcast. In my first story for Environment News Service in January 1999, I said that these mysterious contrails were sickening Americans. The illness patterns coincided precisely with so-called heavy spray days, particularly on weekends. People would see this gritting, unusual activity, aerial activity in the sky. They would start to cough, they would get asthma attacks, severe enough to send them to emergency rooms. Doctors were telling the New York Times, we've never seen anything like this. People were dying in great numbers in the early days of this project, and the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, went on record and said, we really don't know what this is. It's not the flu. They called it an epidemic of mortalities. That was their phraseology.
When is this?
This is 98, 99, and 2000, the winter months. This was reported in the United States, Canada, in Peterborough, Ontario. The hospital there had 307 acute asthma admissions in a single day. In Birmingham, England, 8,000 people died in 3 weeks, mostly elderly. It was in all the papers, BBC. They were using meatpacking trucks as portable morgues. It was very drastic. All I can say as a journalist is this was coincident to videotape and visual reports of tic-tac-toe patterns and unusual gritting in the sky. Exactly coincided. So very dangerous program.
I'm standing on the roof of my building in the Bronx, New York. And as you can see, the entire sky, as far as you can see, is blanketed with these chemtrails. Stretching all the way over to Manhattan, or to New Jersey. There's another one being made as we speak, Saturday, March 10, 2012. It's around noon time. And look at this. You can see this chemtrail here. It almost looks as if it's falling onto the ground. You can see how it's dissipating at the very end there. Falling into the river or falling.
Geoengineers are proposing spraying 10 to 20 million tons of toxic aluminum and other substances into our sky for the stated goal of cooling our planet.
So let me distinguish these two different kinds of geoengineering as clearly as I can. So the first one is we call solar radiation management, and that's the idea that you could put mostly reflective particles or other means to make the Earth whiter.
Weather is part of our planet, it's part of our nature. Weather drives everything. Weather drives all of our food. So yeah, weather is creation. It's part of creation, and many people call that God. And people who play with their weather or control our weather are playing God because they want power. Yeah. You control the weather, you control the planet.
The IPCC is the organization within the WMO, and that's the international organization dealing with weather. And it basically says that climate change is human-caused and will have impacts on us now, and those impacts will become more and more significant over time.
I believe the data shows very clearly for anyone who truly does objective research that although they can cool regions, very large regions, temporarily, and of course toxically, the overall effect is a much worsened warming.
The real issue in chemtrails is what causes them to be persistent. and I don't know that answer yet, but if you can cause a contrail to be consistent, that is persistent, that is to stay out in the atmosphere longer, so it can create a cloud, what is the mechanism for that? What has changed in that jet to cause the contrail behind it to persist as opposed to dissipate? Is that a natural phenomenon because we have more moisture in the air? Is it a natural phenomenon because the stratosphere is getting colder? Is it an additive that they put to jet fuel? Is it truly a chemical that they spray with the jet afterwards? I don't know. But the very term persistent contrail is used so as to indicate it's different from a contrail. So my question is, what's the additive? What got added to cause it to be persistent?
I can say this, that for any skeptic, I would ask them, why would I not believe geoengineering is the source of this when, one, the patents describe exactly what we see in the air, the express goal is to block the sun. Two, the ingredients on the ground are exactly what those patents state as primary ingredients. Three, you have administration officials like John Holden of the Obama administration openly stating their support for geoengineering. Four, you have scientific groups like the Arctic Methane Emergency Group openly calling for emergency wartime geoengineering. It can easily be found and researched by anyone who chooses to look up the AME group, the Arctic Methane Emergency Group.
My personal opinion is that we have to keep geoengineering on the table. We have to look at it very carefully because we might get desperate enough to want to use it. The danger, of course, with geoengineering is the one I was referring to a moment ago. We don't understand the system well enough to predict its responses in detail, and that means there's always a danger if you try to engineer the system on a large scale that you will do something that has side effects that are worse than the dimension of the problem you're trying to cure with the geoengineering in the first place. There are a variety of schemes that have been discussed for geoengineering. A classic example is injecting reflecting particles into Earth orbit.
What is occurring is the deliberate and systematic alteration of the ecosystem of this planet through a physical means of injecting particulate matter, extremely fine particulate matter into the atmosphere. I look at it at this point as a global scale operation. And I examined those questions about whether or not it was physically feasible to modify the entire atmosphere. And at the beginning, that seemed a little bit of a stretch. It was not a set answer to me at all. But you'll find when you study the atmosphere that actually it is quite feasible, and the atmosphere is much more delicate and fragile than many of us might realize.
If you just want to trust government, you can just let it all happen. But if you want to try to get a public dialogue going, I think the best thing is for state governments who are at risk to begin inquiring as to what the government is going to do. I'm just wanting the government to be truthful so that the citizens can make honest decisions about their future.
Pictures don't lie. That's all there is to it. It's like the way the government uses red light cameras to enforce traffic violations. The photographs are evidence. It's that simple. Look at this picture of Central Park. Does this look normal to you? I mean, the coloring, the weird purples and greens and blues that are in these stripes. I remember this day, December 6th. I was walking towards the Empire State Building and I saw a plane cutting directly across the building. And I called Steve and I said, Steve, we got to take some pictures today, man. So we went out and we got these photographs, unsuspecting people just going about their daily lives. In the meantime, look up. What do you see? Does that look normal to you? I'm a director of photography by trade. That's what I do. I take pictures. I've been doing this for 20 years plus, and I can tell you what I'm seeing in the skies is different now than it's ever been.
You can't hide this. You simply can't hide this. That's why I believe this issue will be known one way or the other.
We want people to look into this. We want people to question. We want people to look into what geoengineers are denying they're doing, but state they urgently want to do.
The problem is when you do the research, there's a clause that's called informed consent. An informed consent, my understanding, I'm not an attorney, but my understanding of informed consent is when you don't protest, you're basically allowing the government or allowing the military to experiment on you and your children. So when they say, well, possibly we can modify hurricanes or we can modify the storm, they don't really need to say what the other things are or how they do it or what the human health implications are or the environmental health implications are. But by not refusing, you're basically giving your informed consent that you're okay with being a guinea pig for these experiments.
So do I think there's persistent contrails in the sky? Yes. On a clear day, you go up and look at them. Anybody who wants to look at them can see them. They're not short streams of cloud-like things you can see. They're very long. They go from horizon to horizon. So there isn't a question of what they are, or are they in existence? They are. The literature talks about it, including the IPCC. So the word persistent contrail is in the scientific documents where they're observing phenomena.
So I'm hopeful that as the discussion enlarges around geoengineering and the public is invited to enter the debate or enters it regardless, that chemtrails will be brought out of the closet, will be brought forward, and that the chemtrail community, the movement, can enter this discussion, and I would suggest, first of all, by dropping the word chemtrails. It's become a poisoned word, and we can use it as code among ourselves, for the media, for the public. We use the words of the scientists of the international debate. We call it stratospheric aerosols, which is what they are. We call it SRM, solar radiation management. We call it geoengineering. We call it climate engineering. All of those are accepted scientific terms. If we can do that, we can bring this whole chemtrails discussion into the broader discussion of geoengineering and finally have a public influence on a very dangerous program.
So now let's talk about what we're going to do. What can we do? What are the options? Obviously, this is taking place, so my question is, while we're in these times of tight budgets and firing school teachers and firing emergency services and discontinuing food for the needy and help for the elderly, how much does this program cost? How much is it costing taxpayers every day or every year?
We need public oversight, we need public disclosure, so this technology, these actions and these massive budgets can be used for the people and not against them.
The reason I'm in this battle, one that I never wanted in my worst nightmare, is because if I can't walk out my door and breathe without sucking in a lungful of toxic metals, and my children can't breathe without sucking this stuff in, I simply have no choice but to try as hard as I can to expose this issue.
So what to do? We need participation. We need your help. This is an initiative-based documentary. It's not just a documentary that you can watch and think about. This is a documentary that hopefully helps you to take action with a grassroots type strategy. Get the app, go on the website, send us your photos, let the lawmakers know that you're not okay with it.
Okay, that's the Lookup documentary. Just one note about something that's appeared at the start and the end of that. The Lookup, the Sky Alert application. It's being used in the United States, but we're not quite at the stage where we're ready to use it here yet. It's just been configured so that the data for the various MPs and so forth are being entered into a database. So it's just been configured for use here in Australia, but that should be ready before too long, based on what Paul told me before. Now, there might be a few that feel like you want to ask a question. We hope that's the case, but you're going to have to hold off. Two reasons for that. First of all, I may not be able to answer all the questions myself, and we've actually dedicated a separate section for that at the end. So I'm going to give a presentation now, and then Paul will accept questions from you. We've dedicated about a 10 to 15 minute segment for answering any questions. And Paul will also speak about the activist side of this, what inroads have been made to bring this to awareness, increase awareness, and also to bring this into more public debate. So Paul will cover those things, and also at the end, as I mentioned, we'll hand out some information to you to take away and research yourself. Let's just go into more detail in some areas. Okay, so hopefully we've partly answered the question, what is geoengineering? And in a nutshell, it's intentionally altering the atmosphere of this planet, which in turn alters the climate. There are numerous technologies that are being utilised to bring this about, or that's involved in geoengineering. So the question is, are geoengineering programs currently being conducted? And they definitely are. We have proof of this, and we can go into some detail about that. Are there further programs that aren't being run at the moment, or technologies that are being proposed? Yes, this is true as well. And you'll notice now more of either hitting the newspapers or various publications are talking about proposed geoengineering programs or ways technologies can be employed to decrease CO2 and other greenhouse gases, and also the other programs which are part of geoengineering. So chemtrails, which that gentleman in the film said is a virtually dirty word, I think can still legitimately be used, but it's not the word that the professionals, the scientists use, and so we like to discuss it in their terms. But this is only one facet of the geoengineering program. But I guess it'll be quite a main part of the focus of the discussion tonight. So who's funding geoengineering? Perhaps that's an interesting question to ask. Well, unfortunately, government agencies, including agencies like the CIA, who have carried out some of these geoengineering programs via the front company Evergreen, at least in the past. Large agricultural firms such as Monsanto fund geoengineering. And billionaires such as Bill Gates and Richard Branson also put a lot of money into these programs. So let's just talk about terminology. And terminology is such an interesting thing. You can talk about it from no, I haven't sold in one, I suppose, but let's just talk about a couple of terms. First of all, the term chemtrail, as we've probably mentioned until now, is a layman's term, really. It's within the community, people have been researching it. As lay researchers, we've really just coined this term and it's been used. Or alternatively, nanoparticulate aerosol spraying is another valid expression. And again, we're really talking about those large white trails that go through the sky and describing what's taking place. The scientists themselves and the geoengineers use terms such as SRM, which is solar radiation management. And the essence of that, and I think the term is very descriptive, is that you're laying a blanket of aerosols in the lower stratosphere so that the radiation is managed, so that the radiation or solar radiation doesn't break through that filter completely, and then, as I said, you're creating like a filter effect at a point in the atmosphere, and less sunlight therefore is hitting the Earth's surface. Alternatively, SAG is used, which is stratospheric aerosol geoengineering. Just to recall a bit of science, I know probably most of us covered this in science class way back when. The stratosphere is a point in the atmosphere that's about 12 kilometres above the Earth's surface, between 12 kilometres and about 50. So it's a fair range. And it starts, another 12 kilometres is about 39,000 feet. So the area under that's called the troposphere. So commercial flights fly at the upper troposphere and into the lower stratosphere in that kind of range of altitude. So there's troposphere up to 12 k's above the surface of the Earth. Then from 12 to 50, the stratosphere, and then beyond that, there's another sphere as well, which we'll talk about a bit later. Okay, so that's described stratospheric aerosol, and that's where these aerosols are being laid, in the lower stratosphere and upper troposphere. And another expression that's used is persistent contrails. I think this is a bit of a misnomer, and the reason being that the trails that we see through the sky, that are these aerosols or chemtrails, they're persistent, but they're not contrails, meaning that they're not going through a process of condensation. See, when your ice crystals condense out the back of a plane, that disappears fairly quickly. But when you've got, these chemtrails or persistent trails, they're not being condensed, they're staying there, okay? Staying there for a long time. So, we'll just to highlight this a little bit more, contrails versus chemtrails or aerosol spraying. Characteristics of contrails, and why the distinction is important? Well, because when you point this out to people, I guess because this program's been carried out now for 10 to 20 years, people are getting used to seeing these things in the sky, these Belmont trails from end to end. And sometimes because they've become normalised to it, they may think this is a normal plane emission, whereas it really isn't. And we're going to show you some film footage that will illustrate this as well. So typical characteristics of contrails, they're visible under specific conditions. So these are the trails that stay behind for a short time and disappear. They're at high altitudes and low humidity, so under specific conditions you'll get a contrail. And these essentially water vapour, or that's created from ice crystals condensation. Okay. And as I said, these typically disappear after 3-5 seconds or so. Chemtrails, by contrast, are produced in a whole variety of weather conditions. So whether it's at 6,000 feet or up at 40,000 feet, that trail will be emitted and will stay there regardless of whether it's cold, or it's a heat wave, or humidity conditions. Once they push that button or lever, or however it's exactly activated, it's going to come out the back. And they can turn it on and off, by the way. We've seen plenty of footage where it'll be on for a kilometre or so, then it'll be turned off, there'll be absolutely nothing, and then it'll continue later on. And as I say, they continually consistently leave a wide, dense trail behind them. After a while, after 15 to 20 minutes, they tend to fan out or broaden into wider, not so dense trails. Usually takes at least 15 minutes or so, and then if you get multiple chemtrails through the sky, as we often get, it becomes what's known as aerosol banks, which are like layers of chemtrail, and they become like banks, yeah. And they look somewhat like cirrus formations, but not exactly, but a bit similar. What I'll do now is I'll play just a 2-minute clip from a guy called Clifford Carnicom. He was one of the elderly gentlemen that spoke in that film. He's a scientist, pretty hardcore scientist, and he's going to talk about, there's going to be some footage, and he'll talk a bit about this process of condensation and also about the aerosol spraying. So I'll play it for you now. If I haven't made it clear, hopefully he will make it clear.
What you are seeing now is quite normal. These contrails are the trademark of high-altitude aircraft since the close of World War II. You notice that the condensation disappears fairly quickly, much like your breath on a cold winter day. This is as it should be, and as it has been. For those curious enough to delve into the physics, chemistry, and thermodynamics of contrails, this normalcy has a more thorough explanation. Yes, science and common sense do agree that the balances of nature are achieved with this common phenomenon. Take a different turn, a turn to explore an unusual world that now surrounds us, and yet a world that many of us remain unaware of. The The atmosphere of this planet has been changed, and you are now being introduced to one of the main causes of that change. The aircraft at the upper portion of the screen is leaving a normal contrail, and it vanishes as any trail of water vapor is expected to. But beneath it, you see an aircraft emission that is stationary, thick, continuous, and persistent, and it must eventually be concluded that it is not primarily water vapor. The environmental conditions for each trail are not exceptionally different from one another, and yet the result and impact from each trail is entirely different. The only logical way this can occur is if the trails themselves are very different from one another.
Okay, so let's talk about the nature of chemtrails. They consist of billions of nanoparticles sprayed, or nanoparticulates they're called, sprayed into the upper troposphere and lower stratosphere. I think I've already explained, I was going to draw up on the board, but pretty much we're talking again about the height of the stratosphere, the altitude, about 12 kilometres from the Earth's surface, which is pretty much where the commercial flights will lay those trails as well. And as Clifford Carnicom mentioned, the trails are essentially a solid mass of nanoparticles that eventually spread out due to gravity, wind, and so forth, as opposed to a condensation trail which disappears or evaporates after 5 seconds or so. The big question is, how are they spraying? What do they consist of, these trails? They're nanoparticulates, metallic compounds that have reflective properties. Right, so that was mentioned in the look-up film. And I guess the theory of it is that you have certain metallic oxides which have reflective qualities or properties, and when the sun or radiation hits those, they tend to reflect them back into space, away from the Earth. So the main compounds that are used are aluminum oxide, barium salts, and strontium. And these appear in certain patents, geoengineering patents, and there's one which we'll actually show you before too long. There's a US patent there, been around for a long time. And there's also some evidence that other materials are being sprayed as well, sulfur dioxide, manganese, and a number of other compounds.
What's strontium?
Sorry?
What's strontium
used for? Well, again, it's one of the metals that has reflective quality. I don't know the specifics of why that's used over perhaps barium salts, but maybe Paul can answer that a bit later. We'll try and get the questions in. So raise that again for Paul, if you can remember. And Paul, you can run away and do some study. No, you'll know it. What evidence do we really have that these chemicals are being sprayed? Well, first of all, they're in the white papers and proposals by the geoengineers. They suggest that these reflective metal oxides should be used. They have appeared in jet fuel patents, and at first I thought, why on earth would you want that in your jet fuel? Doesn't the plane work efficiently and the motor work without having those things in it? But anyway, and they also appear in geoengineering papers since the early 90s. And probably one of the most famous ones is the one that we'll show briefly in the look-up film, stratospheric Welsbach seeding for reduction of global warming. So in the abstract and description areas there, they explain that we have a problem of global warming. We want to be able to offset that, and one way we can do it is to use these reflective properties to actually spray and cause this blanket across the Earth. And then it has actual claims. I mean, please read it. We don't have a lot of time, but just read a little bit of it if you like. And down the bottom, I didn't quite get it fully in the slide, but at the very bottom, right-hand side, number 3 there, you see the method claim 1, wherein said material comprises aluminium oxide. It is actually underneath the next line, I didn't get that. So they are specifically mentioned within these patents for geoengineering purposes. It's not just guesswork, or not just looking at the proposals of the geoengineers. they physically appear in the patents, which this one was presented to the Patents Office I think about 1990, accepted in 1991, so this is being used for geoengineering purposes. Okay, a bit more about evidence that we have these chemicals are being sprayed. Air, water and soil tests have been done in a number of areas across the globe, and areas that are very heavily sprayed nearly always turn up with very heavy barium salts, aluminium and strontium content. So you're getting this as a consistent picture across the board. You're getting these readings that are well above what would be classed as healthy levels. So you can imagine with a lot of this metal or toxic metal floating around, you're going to have some health problems. So we believe it's certainly a contributing factor to a lot of different health conditions. You might have heard the Global Healing Centre in the US coming out with some really fantastic natural products. And Edward Group has mentioned several times that all his clients, he finds that he has so many people in the airline industry that come to him for help. They've got toxic levels of metals. And I actually asked my naturopath if she had similar, and she said yes, she has. But unfortunately she's not here tonight, but hopefully she'll come to the next one. As you can imagine, for different reasons, you're going to have problems with or issues within the ecological systems. Having this sort of metal content raining down on the soils, as well as the fact that you've got dimming. You've got less photosynthesis happening. So you've got effect on crop production because of less sunlight. And another characteristic is that a lot of these soils that have heavily sprayed areas have increased alkalinity. Thus again, impacting crop production and also plantation. How are these dispersed? Well, they're military operations. It's not an unusual thing to see unmarked planes, and planes we know are military, that will actually carry out pretty hardcore spraying in certain areas, crisscross and all sorts of strange routes through the sky. Commercial airlines are in on the act as well. As I mentioned, they're incorporated in the jet fuels. These chemicals are stored on board via arrays of cylinders in a separate area of the plane and released. There are different ways these can be released, but one way is through special ports or nozzles. And I thought you'd be interested to see this was from the M70 search plane. This was taken from BBC footage. There was a movie that was about 2 minutes, and they were talking about how these guys were going in the search operation, and there was a guy near the window that was talking about what they're going to do that day and how they're heading out 9,000 kilometres from the Western Australia coast. And someone took a still, because I noticed as well in the background that, well, we've got, you know, a port sitting up on top of the wing there that's pushing it out. So it's surprising where they turn up. Okay, there's a couple of large cylinders, and you notice that there's a US patent there. It's an evergreen, a CIA in other words, evergreen patent, 7413145. So some people have taken some interesting snaps along the way that are concerned about these things. Now, even in our own state here, in certain parts of the state, we are really blasted at certain times. Some days are worse than others. And a person in the group, Chris Grove, sent some information or uploaded to the Facebook page. Late September last year, he had 70 planes go overhead, pouring out chemtrails. 70 planes, and he documented all the flights, what they were, what time they came through. 23 Qantas, Virgin 27, Jetstar 12, Tiger 8. And then he's listed them all in detail. What time they started, what flight they are. The first one, I guess Qantas, isn't it? 400, A400, the time. Starting at 12:20 in the afternoon, going right through to 6:27. So in about a 6-hour period, had 70 planes come through and blast.
12 hours.
12 hours. Okay, I misread it. Yeah, 12 hours. That's still getting 70 planes, and they got a real mess of the sky. So why are they spraying? Well, let's look at those who are behind the spraying program. What do they have to say? As mentioned earlier, it's to mitigate the effect of global warming. And we remember looking at that, the patent, where it actually mentioned this is to help offset global warming. That was the purpose behind it. And that was way back in 1991. Now, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issues a report, which we get to hear about regularly. And when the fifth assessment report came out, there was this little golden nugget in it. If SRM, solar radiation management, were terminated for any reason, there is high confidence that global surface temperatures would rise very rapidly to values consistent with the greenhouse gas forcing. So there's a plain admission from the IPCC that these programs are taking place, and their take on it is if we take these away, then your global temperatures or your ground temperatures are going to rise. And we'll look at that claim a little bit later on as well. Okay, I want to talk a bit about an area which is very much linked in with these programs, with these geoengineering programs. It's like a twin. The two go together. You know, they're one's part of the other. To a lot of people, this might seem like science fiction. It might seem really like it's way out there, even though you might have seen a little article, newspaper article here and there, and sort of, you know, you've been alerted to the fact that either the Chinese have claimed, you know, that they've been able to generate snow or end a drought or whatever. You know, here and there you do see things mentioned, even in the mainstream media. But as you look into this and you realise what has actually been happening, I've got to tell you that weather modification is major. There is major weather modification taking place. What we'll do is we'll take you through a bit of the history as well and some aspects of weather modification. Well, first of all, it's been going for absolute decades. This is not something that's, the weather manipulation hasn't just started last year or, you know, 10 years ago. The different forms of weather manipulation have occurred for going back well into the last century. There's experimental research been going on and numerous fully implemented programs as well. There's a lot of experimentation that was conducted, whether this be creation of rain or various other programs conducted from about the time of the end of the World War through the 60s. It was largely in sort of more experimental research mode through that era. Technology is now deployed in numerous projects worldwide. Most countries have weather modification programs, and many of them. There's one company that was established in 1961 called Weather Modification Inc. It has contract work for both governments and other corporations. Don't believe me? Here's a web page. When most people look up, they see clouds, we see potential. And about us, now more than ever, the worldwide need for solutions to atmospheric necessities such as water resource management, environmental quality monitoring is critical. With nearly half a century of successful programs, our experience speaks for itself. And there, I think, fourth one down is cloud seeding, weather radar systems, various things for monitoring the weather, but also directly modifying the weather. Cloud seeding is one of their, you know, bread and butter lines as far as I can see. Dispersing fog and snow, creation of snow. Here's another part of their website where it talks about its worldwide success and the many clients it has had. And there's a table below. I've only just grabbed the top part of it. If you look through, they're in alphabetical order. They go down to Z obviously. And there's about 100, as far as I didn't count them all, but there was about 100 clients. Most of them government. And you see Australia there, the third one. Queensland Environmental Protection Agency is a client. It is a client of Weather Modification Inc. Predominantly for cloud seeding projects. Okay, let's go into a bit more. I'm trying to race through this. I feel it's an interesting subject, but in the interest of time, I'll try to make it as quick as I can. There's a website which we put in the information, which has actually collated a lot of this information about the timeline with weather modification. And it's a link from the geoengineeringwatch.org page. You can look at that later. Just a few highlights. In 46, the researchers at General Electric developed the method for cloud seeding, or other rainfall creation using dry ice and silver iodide emitted from aircraft just below the cloud. And this has been refined, and basically the silver iodide is the main component for rainfall creation. So 46 it started with serious projects. Then you got some more highlights. Okay, 47 and 53, New York University teamed up with US Navy to seed cyclones. And some of those were done, you know, across the Atlantic Ocean and with varying degrees of success. Basically, by the 50s, they were able to steer hurricanes in their documentation. 67 to 72, of course, Vietnam era. US conducts weather warfare over Vietnam. It was known as Operation Popeye. Its intention was to extend the monsoon season over Laos. Specific areas were the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and they were seeding again with silver iodide, and targeted certain areas, so they extended the period of the monsoon out by another 30 days or so, and there was colossal rainfall in those times, so that tracks couldn't really be utilised. So it was like a block, I guess. So you've got here weather used as a weapon, really. I mean, it might be indirect or whatever, you know, but it's the way it's been utilised there as a weapon. It was considered successful. The 54th Weather Reconnaissance Squadron carried out the operation to make mud, not war. Okay, 74, the United Nations General Assembly bans environmental warfare. Okay, so it's by 74 it had become an issue where and usually the laws are behind, or a bit of a step behind science and scientific activity. So by that time it was felt necessary at the UN level to establish treaties. I mean, most people don't know this, but this is a fact. In 78 there was the Weather Weapons Treaty, whereby one nation in wartime cannot carry out weather activities or weather warfare against another nation. However, there's nothing to stop one nation internally carrying out various weather programs and various things. The problem is, of course, that when you have a front that's been directed or changed or whatever it be, it doesn't come up to the end of the nation and the country and say, well, this is where I'll stop, because this nation's not going to make... Well, obviously, it's very interdependent, the whole system, and what weather modification occurs in one country will affect another. There's a flow-on effect. In 1996, the US Air Force published Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. And that document's on the web and can be read, and there's a lot of good stuff. I'm going to use that word strangely. Interesting stuff in that document. And in 2009, Operation HAMP was taken up by the Department of Social Security in an operation to modify and steer hurricanes with geoengineering aerosols. This originally was offered to NOAA, NOAA department over in the US, and they sent back because they were asked to do it, and they sent back basically saying we believe it's unethical, and they had various reasons why they didn't want to do it. But instead it was under the auspices of the Department of Homeland Security. Okay, now this is pretty hardcore stuff. I'll just go through it quickly. The HARP facility. There are other technologies that are in existence to enable weather modification to happen. Over at Gakona in Alaska, there's a series of arrays. They're in a large valley there that might look a bit mysterious. This was an early photo. It's been expanded since those days to 180 antennas. They're all in an array. Okay, now this is what happens. A HARP facility is, as I say, an antenna array which focuses radio frequency beam into the ionosphere. So, you know, we're talking about the layers before. We go up to the troposphere, stratosphere, and above that is the ionosphere, which starts about 50 k's above the surface of the Earth. So, projected right up to the ionosphere is a beam which will heat the ionosphere. Okay. Well, the patents for this claim that it can be used as a radar shield, so military application, and also for weather modification purposes. So the heating of the ionosphere, what that does is causes a segment of the atmosphere to lift because of the heating, and therefore the jet streams below it are altered. So depending on where they target it, how they transmit their frequencies, then they can, it's variable the way they can use it. The technology was developed by Dr. Eastland in the 80s, and it was based upon Tesla's work on directed energy weapons. And Tesla goes right back to the early part of the 19th century. Dr. Eastland's inventions were accepted by the Patents Office in 1987, so the technology is nearly 30 years old. However, the facility wasn't fully developed until 93. That's when the actual construction began at that facility in Alaska. It's co-jointly owned by the US Navy, Air Force and DARPA. And the patented technology has been sold to technologies or high-tech corporations such as E-Systems and after that Raytheon. So these are in the hands of private corporations as well. Now, in 2014, we have over 20 similar facilities. Most of them aren't as large, but nevertheless, these arrays exist in various parts around the globe. And in Australia, I know of at least one is Exmouth. I believe there are more than that. Paul could probably talk about specific sites where they exist, but one of the famous ones is at Exmouth in WA. So how does this work? Well, they hit the ionosphere with these RF frequencies and they bounce back. And so are there any visible effects of these frequencies which are reflected back off the ionosphere? Well, one thing we see is real anomalies in the radar images. There's one up in the border of Northern Territory. Got a couple more. Radar rings. There's one term that's used for these. And one over Victoria as well, the one on the right. Another question is, does this affect the cloud formations? Well, I've taken a number of photos from Geelong. And what you see here are not classic cumulostratus formations. Cumulostratus formations are kind of like pebbly in effect, wider, broader pebbles across the sky, that kind of thing. These are totally manipulated, as you can see, a real distorted effect, rippling effect across the sky. Totally manipulated. And there's a couple more. Let's just go on, talk a little bit about why the motive behind the spraying, again, a bit more. And as I said there at the start, weather modification or manipulation is the name of the game. This is what it's all about. And this is done, for the most part, for profit and control on part of these big corporations. So by changing the direction of the jet streams, we move our weather fronts in certain directions, and these are proven to really benefit the large corporations such as Monsanto. And of course the Defence Department, particularly in the US, is very interested in this technology. And the aerosol spraying works in tandem, and we've been able to trace this and found that when we get these sort of effects in the sky, these rippling effects through the whole clouds, we often get chemtrailing at the same time or within a day or two. And what they can do is suspend rainfall over one area, cause one area to dry up literally, or cause storms not to fully develop, sequester that, and as the system goes downstream, then it'll fall in other areas. So, as I say, on the bottom, suspends rain, and it also has been noticed in Scott Stevens has videos where he shows that storms have tried to develop several times in these times of heavy spraying, and they virtually get aborted. They just fall apart. The rain doesn't happen. Okay, so I'm going to have a simple corollary for you. Weather, if you control the weather, you control crop production. And if you can control crop production, you control the food supply. If you control the food supply, you largely control populations. And as Henry Kissinger even said back in 1993, he couldn't see any reason why weather couldn't be used as a weapon, and why food couldn't be used as a weapon as well. So, and notably, the agriculture giant Monsanto, they recently bought the Climate Corp for climate manipulation. For climate manipulation, they now produce an aluminium seed, or resistant seed, aluminium resistant seed. Isn't that interesting? Right, let's look at the claim about global warming. The reality check on that is, the evidence suggests there's no real decreasing of warming due to the program, the aerosol spraying. There may be some cooling during the process, perhaps on a hot day when you normally have the full heat of the sun blasting on the surface of the earth, you've been able to attenuate some of that. But what we find is towards the end of those days you get a real build-up of heat, even though it's really cloudy, or this cloud's formed. And during the night you're going to have that heat stay in because the outbound radiation gets trapped by that layer of aerosol. According to the Global Weather Service, when the planes were grounded several days after 9/11, there was an impact on temperatures. And what they showed was that across the board there were daytime temperatures dropped by an average of 1 to 1.8 Fahrenheit. That was, to them at least, unexplained. So it dropped during the day when the planes weren't in the sky. It did drop during the day, but also increased during night time by approximately the same amount. And so I guess if you put those planes back in the sky and regularly spraying, you'll get the opposite of that. You'll tend to get some cooling during the day, the heat gets trapped during the night. Consequences. Global dimming and its effect on the human system, on the ecosystem and our health. NASA says that 22% less sunlight hits the Earth now compared to several decades ago. So you've got to have an effect on the photosynthesis system. Increased aluminium causes reduction in soil biology, less fertile soils, plants, trees, etc. And the same for alkalinity. Consistently, the alkalinity is rising, not good conditions for growing. And there's also some evidence now that's contributing to the further depletion of the ozone. And I mentioned before, with storms particularly, we tend to get less precipitation. And I've noticed a decrease in the amount of dew that we get in winter mornings as well. Health dangers. Okay, well, aluminium. Neurotoxin. Neurotoxicity is linked to Alzheimer's disease and autism. Respiratory illness. And just before we leave that one, now respiratory illness is the third highest disease in the United States. It used to be 8th about a decade ago. And I would imagine it's pretty similar out here. That discusses some of the effects, but it's related to the mental or neurological problems. That will be in your handout, so we'll just go through that quickly. Health dangers, again, this time with barium. And some things I mentioned there, low blood potassium, respiratory failure, a number of symptoms there. It's identified. All right, so in summary, geoengineers have explained in white papers and proposals what they would do. They felt that they need to spray the atmosphere. There are other programs as well, but that's fundamentally one of them. How they would do it, via their own SAG programs, otherwise known as aerosol spraying. The government provides billions in funding to assist with these projects, and that has been disclosed publicly as well. So you and I are paying for this, okay, through our taxes. And geoengineering proposals, they exactly match what we're observing in the sky, in the soil and water. We've got their patents, and we even have some images of how they specifically fitted out their aircraft. Are there any whistleblowers? There are a few whistleblowers. Most of them will not divulge their name. Kristen Megan is one lady who's been good enough to come forward fully, and there's a reference in the handout material to a link you can listen to a talk that she gives. She was an Air Force industrial hygienist, who became aware of the program in considerable detail. So I think we have them, but our biggest problem, one of our major problems I feel about this whole issue is that, which is one of the reasons that we're holding this evening. But just in conclusion, I'd like to leave this thought with you, and that is that the solution lies within us. I'll read from Dane Whittington, who appeared on that Lookup documentary. Our planet is literally under an all-out assault by the climate engineers day in and day out. Virtually all life on Earth is being subjected to the dire ramifications from this assault. The fight to expose the heavy metal and chemical spraying of our skies is nothing short of a fight for life, all of us uneven in this battle. Each of us can help to raise awareness by passing on credible information with an appeal to investigate to all those who are surprisingly still uninformed of this critical issue. This effort is of immense importance. Each day the climate engineering insanity continues to darken an already dim horizon. It is imperative that we all pull together in the task of exposing global geoengineering programs. David Whittington. That's all I've got to convey to you tonight. Thanks for listening. I'd like to introduce you now to Paul Mack, who is a leader of the Melbourne Against Chemtrails Facebook page and is also really one of the foremost experts on geoengineering in Australia. And I'm not pumping up too much, that's a fact, mate. And so what we'd like to do now is have perhaps 10 to 15 minutes of question time. Hopefully you've got a few questions. If there's no questions, maybe we haven't done our job, because hopefully we've stoked your curiosity and your thought processes so that you can want to go and learn more about this whole program and what can be done to help fight it. So without any further, let's thank you, Paul. I'll kind of be the facilitator, so if anyone wants to raise their hand, I'll just sort of try to pick you out or whatever, and Paul will give us the goods.
Thanks, Stephen. Expert, yeah, I'm not sure about that. Got some training wheels on still. I guess we all have. So, how many people in the room know what geoengineering is, or heard the term chemtrails or geoengineering before they came here tonight? Can I just have a show of hands? Okay, so most of you have some idea of what's going on and have come for some more information. So, by way of background, I'm a carpenter by trade. I've been in the building industry most of my life. I work as a project manager for a high-end residential construction company these days. And I'm not scientifically trained or anything like that. But one thing I have been doing for the last few years is observing what's been going on and documenting it. And I think that's really where we're getting to with this presentation tonight, is the point that there's not enough people awake to what's going on, and we need more and more people to wake up. So about 3 years ago, I woke up to this. I really thought I was, probably a bit more awake and, aware of what was going on in the background with, conspiracy theories. I'd spent a long time working, studying 9/11 and various, other things like that. So one day I'm on YouTube and what's that little thing in the sidebar? What's this chemtrail thing? And I'll have a look at that, and I'm like, nah, surely not. This can't be happening. I know. Some people have told me, and sure enough, I started looking at it, researching, and I thought, it's happening. Something's happening here. I'm not sure what it is, So I started looking around to see who was awake, to see, who was tuned into this, and I found a guy up in Sydney, Matt MC, and he'd sort of started really the Australia movement, and I teamed up with him, and really we're the founders of Australia New Zealand Geoengineering, against chemtrails and geoengineering, and Australia New Zealand Geoengineering protest. So some 7,000 plus members for the main community, another 4,000 in the protest community. We set up 20 plus groups around the country, all the main centres, satellite groups in the country towns, and started encouraging people to come into these groups and start looking and researching and studying and documenting what's going on. We alluded to one of our guys, who's a sky watcher, Chris Grover, up in Albury Wodonga, and there was a day last year we talked about, we saw 70 planes. Chris has got now 4 of these books. This particular one here is the book of 1 day's worth of geoengineering, stratospheric aerosol spraying in this country. So if you have a doubt that this is going on, have a look at this book. It'll be down on the table at the end of it all. We spent from 6 o'clock in the morning till 7 o'clock at night virtually, taking photos, documenting via Flight Radar 24. So there's an app there online that you can use. So we started. I grabbed the idea from another guy who's really probably birthed the whole process for me, a guy called PK22. And I saw him taking photos of planes and using this particular Flight Radar app. The app's great. It gives you, what airline it is, what the VIN number is on the airframe, what altitude it's flying at, and so we started getting skywatchers together underneath that, taking photos of those planes that are performing these stratospheric aerosol sprays, using time and date stamp, and documenting all of that. And that's what we ended up, 70, it was actually more than 70 planes in one day. We just had to give up in the end because the person on the radar was manning it and the person on the camera was manning it. We were just exhausted by the end of it. So for 2 years now we've been doing this and building an organisation, encouraging people to become skywatchers, encouraging people to, join with us in this documentation process. And people say, why? Well, what's the point of doing this? Well, disclosure is coming. We've backed the geoengineers into a corner virtually. They've painted themselves into a corner. They know that they've been doing this for years and years and years without our consent, without ever publicly acknowledging this. And there's a very strong, they think they're strong, community out there of people who are trying to suppress this information and keep this information down, but it can't stay down for too much longer. These geoengineers are now wanting to mainstream this. The IPCC is talking about this. We already referred to that this evening. They want this out in the public. They want to be able to go full bore doing this stuff over our heads, and they want it legitimised. So what happens? Do they do that? Do they get away with that? No, because people like us we've got this information. They can turn around, they say we're proposing all of these things and this is what we want to do, we're projecting this into the future. The reality is that they've been doing this for many, many years, that they want to bring it out, this disclosure. So when they get to that point, guess who they're going to find? A bunch of us going, wait a minute, what you're proposing is putting all this stuff into the sky and leaving white lines and things like that. Haven't you already been doing this, and you've been doing it without telling us, spending our taxpayers' dollars doing this and spraying us, So that's why we are skywatchers. That's why we document and put all this information together. Some point later this year, we're putting a submission of fact to the government, and we're hoping to open some doors there. So what can you do? I mean, you've seen this presentation this evening, and you're going, well, this is pretty terrifying. It's pretty horrifying. You can engage with us in our communities, in the literature at the end of the table there. You'll find links to all of the Facebook groups, and we want you to come on board with us, join with us. We've been having protests now. We've had 4 protests in Melbourne over the last 18 months or so, and we want to have more. We want to have more and more people join with us. The only way that we're going to kick the door open on this is by weight of numbers. So, at the moment we've only got small numbers. It's growing incrementally. We're going to hit a multiplication factor before too long, and those numbers are going to be undeniable. Currently the media in this country has shut everything down. You can ring the EPA and they refer you to Air Services Australia, or refer you back to CASA, who refer you back to the EPA, and you just go around in a circle and they'll say, oh, it's just nothing but contrails. Well, contrails are real, we don't deny that. They do exist. It's a natural phenomenon that aircraft do form contrails, no problem there whatsoever. But what we're seeing, these big white lines spreading out into persistent clouds, blocking out the sunlight. We're encouraging all our guys to go and get tests done, do soil tests, do water tests, do hair tests, blood tests, fingernail tests, and what's in these tests, you asked? Aluminium, barium, strontium, mercury, cadmium, lead, just to name a few things. So we're seeing the components of the patents that they've been talking about reflected in our own environment. You know, people are coming back and going, well, here's the proof. Here's the, you know, there's no denying that this is happening. You know, but we just need more people to come on board with us. So my encouragement and my mission really is not so much to be an expert in this. I guess I know enough to know enough at this point, but is to build networks of people and to encourage people to join with us in what we're doing, join with us in the documenting, join with us in you know, protesting this. We regularly attend the IPCC meetings now. In fact, the last meeting they worked out who we were, and they didn't allow us to ask our question, even though we had our hand up the whole time. Oh, you over there, you over there. They don't want us to confront their people, but that's what we need to do. We need to be in their face and say, you know, you're not going to get away with this. You're not going to try and normalise or mainstream this this geocrime and not be held to some form of account for it. So, but you know, as I said, there's only such a small fraction of the population that are aware and awake, and I'm excited to be in this room tonight because, you know, all the hands I saw go up before us. There's massive encouragement for me that we're finally breaking some ground, we're finally getting the message out there, we're finally you know, getting that point across to people that this is happening, it's occurring, it's real, and something needs to be done about it. You know, Stephen talked about informed consent. That's exactly right. If you don't stand up and say no, then by your silence you are consenting to this happening, and that's terribly sad if that happens. You know, so don't think that you as one person can't make a difference. You can make a difference. You just need to, you know, join with our communities and start sort of focusing on what we're doing, and you know, start sending emails to politicians, start making phone calls to governmental departments, start bugging the hell out of the EPA, Air Services Australia, CASA, all of these guys. They all know what is going on. They're complicit in this, and their silence is well bought and paid for on tipping. So. And to those guys out there, because we're filming this tonight, you know, there's a point coming where you're going to be held accountable for your actions and what you've done to date. So we're looking for whistleblowers to come forward, people who will, you know, whatever last bit of conscience they've got, will step forward and say, well, you know, what these guys are saying is right, the government is lying to us, these guys are actually telling the truth. This is happening, and hopefully by our pressure, our continued pressure, we can bring some revelation out that will just help us to get it over that sort of tipping point. So that's us in a nutshell. Melbourne Against Chemtrails is the group that I manage. We've just tipped over 1,000 people now for Melbourne. There's probably a few overseas people in there as well. So, but you know, the numbers are growing and people are waking up. People are you know, coming on board at a more exponential rate these days. So anyway, I just wanted to highlight that as a means of doing something. Pardon me, activism is very, very important. A lot of people will watch a presentation like this, or they'll see the information and they'll just feel pretty depressed about it. That's a natural thing. And for me personally, I can't sit there and just watch it and say nothing or do nothing. I have to be someone who engages it and does something, because in that it's like a stress relief for me. You know, like I feel like I'm trapped with the whole situation. I feel more empowered and positive in doing it. So have a think about that. If you're on Facebook, please come and join us. We've got a website that we're launching soon for non-Facebookers to find a community of people that they can engage. And we'll all be in there ready and waiting for you when you come in if you're not engaged in Facebook. A lot of people won't use that social media purely because it really is a CIO controlled thing. So we try to use these tools against them to the best of our ability. I think that's pretty much it in terms of sky watching. I'm sure you've all got some questions, and I don't have the answers to everything. Please don't think that I do, but I'll do my best to answer them. So anyone have any questions they want answered? Yeah.
You wouldn't have a list of addresses, would you, for these people spraying?
No, is the short answer. So we don't have a list of addresses for the people who are spraying us, but what we do have is documentation showing that it is Qantas, that it is Virgin, that it is Air New Zealand, that it is Singapore Airlines. So, you know, you can Google those guys and you know, send some information through to them via their email customer service ports. What else have we got? That's it.
You've been talking about the what I call the dry stuff, like all the aluminium, etc. What about the wet stuff that comes down, looks like spider webs or chewing gum?
Mm-hmm. Yep, sure. So the question there is on geoengineering fallout.
Yeah.
There are different compositions of trails that we've observed. It's not all just one type of trail, so we're seeing various compositions. The researchers in the States that we're following, guys like Russ Tanner and Dane Wigington, have identified up to 12 different compositions and trails. There are people that have high sensitivity levels that can really smell these things or taste them, and they report various metallic tastes or mushroomy type tastes or things like that. So we know that there are various compositions of trails. We don't understand fully what they are yet. What you're referring to specifically in stuff that's falling to the ground, we're calling chem webs, which is a bit of a name that has just sort of been born into the movement, I guess. And some of these have been tested. I've seen 2 test results from the US in these, and they indicate that there's polymer fibres that have somehow formed in this process. And you'll see them. Anzac Day was a perfect day. I don't know if you noticed, Anzac Day was a beautiful day in the morning. By about lunchtime, it started to get a little bit misty. By the afternoon, it was a complete whiteout. And we checked from pretty much from Sale to Albury, up past Bendigo to Mildura. The entire state was being coated with these. People were catching them in their hands, and you know, they were falling on cars. I'd advise you really not to touch them. Maybe just pick them up with some tweezers and put them in a plastic bag and seal that up and have it tested somewhere, sort of thing. We don't really fully understand what these are. We understand that it is chemtrail fallout or stratospheric aerosol fallout, and we've also noted nanoparticulate matter or smart dust. So like little tiny little bits of glitter. You might, you know, just look down in your hand one day and the sparkly stuff. This is probably fallen out of the sky. The premise for solar radiation management is that they put these highly reflective particles up there, the sun hits them, bounces off, and we have a cooling effect underneath. This does work, it's been proven to work, but at the same time we are seeing this fallout in particular. Western suburbs, for some reason, of Melbourne seem to get hit a lot more with this aerosol fallout for some reason. I'm not really sure why that is either. But actually, to answer your question earlier, Nick, re strontium, it is because it's highly reflective that it's used. So
Radioactive too, yeah.
I'm not aware of strontium being, well, I guess, yeah, partially, but it's not a radioactive particle, as far as I'm aware.
I did have a question, just like, I was just wondering what you thought about, like, because they're spraying all these heavy metals and different things that accumulate in the system, and then when you tie in the whole sort of HARP project side of things, where there's these arrays of radio frequencies that can be targeted on places and emitted, what would that, like, surely that would have an effect on people increasingly when the metal content in them is increasing, like, to do with sort of attracting those frequencies through the, wherever the heavy metals are attached to yourself, you're going to be getting fried worse, I was thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. EMF or electromagnetic fields are a very big part of what they're doing with geoengineering. So Stephen referenced it earlier, up in the troposphere and into the stratosphere. These particulates can stay up there for years, literally years, before they come down to Earth. They are showing up in people. People really need to start considering detoxing programs using things like zeolite to flush metals out of the body. We're seeing the advent of smart meters, which are a little EMF meter in your home. These are all adding to the grid, the increase in cell phone towers as well, creating greater electromagnetic fields around. And these fields can be used, or these particulates can be used to transmit or project the EMF energy that they're using via HARP. I don't know about you guys, but me particularly, I've got really sensitive hearing, and I hear all sorts of frequencies, different pitches and things like that. Literally, when EMFs are being used to spread cloud base into the sky, I can just be sitting inside and go, I'll turn that on, I'll go outside. 5 minutes before it was just a flat white sheet, and I go out there and it's just all ripples. You can see the ripples in the clouds where the EMFs are affecting them. So given that we're predominantly made up of fluids and we're taking these metals in, yeah, they do affect us. So I recommend a good detox program, definitely. Any other questions?
Are they aiming the spraying population areas or food production areas? Is there a reason behind it? Because I know that I visited my organic farmer the other day who does grains, and they said last year they were hit with chemtrails, but this year they've moved further north of Clunes now. So, and like, they've actually said that the acidity of their water has gone up to 5, and that it's related to obviously whatever has come down. And it's going to long-term affect their production, and force them to say, they wouldn't do it, but to adopt aluminium-resistant seeds and so forth. So Monsanto's part of it isn't the ultimate game of goal too is to reduce the food supply, increase food prices, and cause hunger and famines.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question there being, what are the purposes of these sprays and trails? Definitely, food control is one of the purposes, the stated purposes of the New World Order, if you like, Agenda 21, which is a bona fide document that was let out a few years ago, specifically states that they want to control the population by manipulating food stocks. So definitely Monsanto creating aluminium-resistant seed strains plays straight into that. And they're also terminator seeds as well, so you might get 1 or 2 harvests out of them, and then that's it. The third one will not produce a seed that's viable that you can use. So you have to go back to Monsanto. So they'll control that seed stock, and they'll obviously have a price on that, and dole out X, Y, and Z amounts to various people. So
terminator seeds are one seed only.
One seed only, is it? Okay.
So isn't climate change really the sort of whitewash that they're using as an excuse for it? For the public, so even if they came forward, they would say to everybody, well, we're doing this for your good because climate change is so real, and everyone's so brainwashed to believe that climate change really is real. And that really is the Achilles heel, because there is no scientific evidence that says climate change is real. It's always caused by carbon dioxide emissions. And that, you go back in history, the world's history, you've had much higher CO2 levels, 20 times higher, and it hasn't affected the climate. And we've had periods where, the carbon dioxide levels have been, same, and yet climate has just been warmer. Like in England at a certain time, they had very warm weather, they had vineyards there in the Middle Ages. So if that's the sort of myth that they're perpetuating throughout society, that climate change is real, you need to save you, we're going to come and save you. We're going to spray.
I agree with you absolutely 100%. That's exactly what's happening. So when I first heard that there was going to be a tax on CO2, it absolutely just stunned me. I thought, how fantastic is that? But yeah, you're absolutely right. So what they're saying is global warming, and then they had the global warming email gate, if you like, where these climatologists were exposed, cooking the books, cooking all of the data. So that global warming quickly changed into climate change, and that's the vehicle, the mechanism that they're driving forward. and that's the way they're going to actually legitimise what they're doing with geoengineering. Is yes, it's going to be the saviour of the planet. We need to do this because of CO2, etc. It's bunk. It's absolutely bunk.
I think what they've done with the whole global warming issue is create a straw man that they can push out there behind, so that their geoengineering activities can remain in the background and they can focus on the straw man they've created. Because the climate is it's very delicate, it is being modified, it is being changed through the geoengineering. But it's like a straw man that you've set up, and people point to that and think that's the problem.
Yeah, yeah. So the data that's being used to point to climate change and global warming is actually, global warming is real in as much as it's man-made through geoengineering. So global cooling, conversely, is also real because that's made through man-made geoengineering. So you can have both heating and cooling going on the planet at the same time, and of course that then causes argument in the debate, and the geoengineers kind of get away scot-free on that. And that's one of the reasons why we attend IPCC meetings, to call them on those questions. So we've managed a couple of questions to them, and the very first one we did was actually the fourth interim report that was released in Melbourne in August last year, and we caught them on the hop with the question, and you could see virtually the panel going, oh, knew this had to happen, sort of thing. So again, that's why we encourage people to come and join us and hold these guys to account, because basically they're saying, oh, we're scientists, we know better, you're just the people in the community, let us sort of, be your guides, sort of thing. So, they need to be held to account for that, definitely. Yes?
I just wanted to ask, if you were to find like particulate matter or coming from the sky or some sort of evidence, like physical evidence of something, and you said to get it tested, where would you recommend to get it tested? Because, like, if you were to get back the results or whatever, and you could keep it and sort of share it, I guess, to build up a bit more of a stronger evidence base if you're going to present the information at some point. So if you could contribute in that way, yeah, just where would you get it tested?
There's a number of labs, and there's some good ones and there's some bad ones. Most of the labs are already aware that people are coming to them and asking for tests on aluminium, barium, strontium, mercury, cadmium, lead, those kinds of things. So if you're going to have something tested, you've got to find a lab that's independent. We've got a list of those in Melbourne against chemtrails. So we encourage people to go to those. Also encourage people to do a double-blind test. It's going to cost a little bit more, but if you send a test to one lab, test to the other lab of the same stuff, and they come back with different results, then you know one of them's cooking the books, right? So certainly encourage people to do that. But yeah, an independent laboratory would be the best way to go, and there's a few of them around, and we're not advertising their names because we don't want them got at, but
sure.
They are there, yeah.
So is it on your website?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Sure, thank you.
Yeah, cool. Come and see me, I'll talk to you about it. Who else have we got? Yeah.
I was wondering, I'm fairly new to this, I was wondering how a heart facility that's like in Western Australia creates a circle that's kind of down in Victoria on your radar spiking things. And you say they're harping today,
Yeah.
and there's like, I can see the lines, but I don't really get it.
Sure.
And I don't understand the mechanism of how something that far away can be impacted so specifically.
Okay. Yeah, well, James can help me with this one as well. It's a bit of a misnomer though. There's only really a dozen or so heart facilities in the world, James, is it?
Oh, it's probably more than that now. It's probably closer to about 20 at least. With HAARP, what it does, it shoots a high frequency up into the ionosphere. The ionosphere naturally rebounds it down. When it does that, it cross-modulates it into a low frequency. If they shoot it directly up into the sky, like at a 90-degree angle from Kokona, it's got a conjugate point that's just south of New Zealand. So they can shoot beams around the world like that.
So they can actually target, they can be very specific where
Yep.
they're at.
It's used for over the horizon radars and stuff like that. We've got a few different facilities down here. We've got a really high powerful one over in Tasmania that's used for missile defence and stuff like that. We've got a few more that are used for missile defence. 2 facilities up in Queensland. one in South Australia, I think, and another 2, maybe 3 in Western Australia, and that's not including the big one, Exmouth.
Do you want to
So,
just explain about the next rad and Doppler?
All right. Well, okay, we'll say we've got HARP. What that does, it intensifies, it pinpoints all of its energy into a tiny region. We've got all these Doppler radars, which are built on NextRad technology. NextRad's what they call it over in America. The Doppler radars, they send out pulses. The pulses aren't directed, they're more over a broader area. So radars, we've probably got about 10 or so in Victoria. There's only about 5 of them that are listed on the Bureau of Meteorology website, but those are capable of small local changes. Things like HARP and that, you're looking at greater areas of changes, different types of things that they can do, like moving the actual different layers of the atmosphere up to reroute the jet stream and certain other things like that. But the little ones, the little Doppler radars, they're more or less capable of small area weather modification.
Troy,
yeah, I was just going to ask about your thoughts on the Arctic methane releases. And is there any truth in them saying that they're trying this engineering to try and lessen the effect of the melting? Apparently there's evidence of it releasing, and apparently there's enough there to kill the Earth 10 times over or something.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's trapped in the permafrost.
Yep.
Dane Wigington talks about this extensively from geoengineeringwatch.org. And there's now the Arctic Methane Emergency Group. If you go and have a look at those guys online, they talk about that extensively. So what's happening with geoengineering, it is raising the mean temperature slightly and enough to melt the permafrost. And underneath the permafrost, trapped there for thousands, millions of years in a lot of cases, is methane gas that's being trapped in the Earth's crust. So in this melting, the methane is now rising to the surface. It's coming up, and it's basically a greenhouse gas that's being released. If anything, it's worse. With CO2, I don't really hold too much stock of it, but methane is really, really a bad one to get out there. Plumes of these methane gas releases have been documented, and some of them are kilometres wide coming up, and they're just going into the atmosphere. So they are having an effect, definitely. But that's, if we stop geoengineering now, we might have a few bad years where we're going to have some rough times weather-wise, but the planet will reset its systems and its cycles and normalise itself. Mother Nature will look after itself. But yeah, go to the Arctic Methane Emergency Group, and they've got a wealth of information and data on that one there. Who else have we got?
Last chance.
Yeah, I was going to ask something. Do you have any fresh bulk scientists on your Facebook group?
We've got a number of researchers from various different backgrounds that we're partnering with and associating with globally. We're linking with the geoengineering movement worldwide, and in terms of engaging those leaders and learning and teaching with them, from them. So there's a number of lead researchers that we take information from. So if you come to the site, the information's back there with the links and everything, and just hit me up. I'll be more than happy to plug you into some of that research, definitely.
Not to be selfish, but
how
often do they spray Geelong in areas? Does anyone have any?
Pretty much daily.
I've noticed there's like a week that they hit
Thursdays seem to be pretty bad lately.
Like around a certain date. I've been marking it on my calendar, and it seems to be popping up.
I can probably answer that a little bit. At least I kept a diary from November to February, and I would say about half the days the sky was geoengineered in some way, the cloud formations. Sometimes you get almost 2 weeks without any chemtrailing, or at least observable. In the morning it wasn't too bad, it was fairly clear, whatever. but then you get most of the next week and maybe the next week after as well. It balanced out, from my observation, about 50%. But it's probably more of it going on. Quite often it goes on at night time because I'll wake up, I'll take the dog for a walk, and I'll notice over Lara, you know, you can still see the remnants of trails or a couple of photos I took there. So I'd say about 50% of the time. Only like it becomes, some days it's really bad on a weekend or quite often Saturday or Friday, something like that.
Event days. Event days, they haven't done that.
Yeah. So it varies, but I don't think we're hit quite as bad as some other areas, but it's still bad enough. You know, it's still half the time, or you know, sometimes you get a real concentration with a few days when they just blast the sky.
Yeah, just on that, I reckon daily, personally. We've been watching for a long time now. We watch patterns, and you know, it's great that you're marking that on the calendar because that way you'll see what patterns are. So some days, like Stephen said, though, you won't see visible trails in the sky. You might see QF63 and 64 doing, you know, the run. They're coming over Warrnambool and up over the airport marker, and then head on up to Albury.
About 1:30 in the afternoon. Most days as QF comes through.
Yeah.
And that generally is your chemtrail.
10, 11 in the morning, 1, 2 in the afternoon, sort of thing. But you might see them perform what looks to be a contrail, and you'll see that other aircraft have crossed the patterns. If you watch the radar in the planes and you get to familiarise yourself with the numbers and the flights and everything, we think what's happening in part is you'll see QF63 or 64 with what looks to be a contrail coming out of it, but then shortly thereafter, you know, you'll see that the whiteout will increase. So we think in an effort to conceal their geoengineering activities that they may be doing a Part A, Part B spray system and concealing really what is a chemtrail or a stratospheric aerosol spray in the guise of a contrail. So not all contrails are contrails, that much we're pretty much aware of. So we don't have the air traffic specifically that you'd see in the UK and Europe and America. Some of those real horror shots there where there's just 20, 30, 40, 50 lines in the sky. We don't get that kind of air traffic. So they have to generate their base, their artificial cloud base in a different manner. So we think they're using Part A, Part B systems through various aircraft that do fly through. We think that possibly they're using offshore oil rigs and platforms to launch from, ships to launch from, and out in the bush to launch rockets or things from as well. We have far too much geoengineered cloud mass come across this state in particular for it not to be occurring or transpiring somewhere. And if you're unsure if it's a geoengineered cloud or not, just put your hand up and block the sun out and have a look at the colour of the cloud. Put a pair of good Polaroid sunnies on, have a look at the colour of the cloud around, it's the fringe of the sun. If you're seeing blues and greens and pinks in there, that's aluminium, barium and strontium right away. You know that somehow that geoengineering has gotten into the sky. So, yeah, I reckon daily pretty much. But yeah.
Back up what you're saying there, Paul.
Yeah.
Quite often I've noticed that you'll get your low-hanging cumulus cloud, and you might get 70 or 80% will cover with genuine or natural cumulus cloud. But then you see a break in it, and because we recognise the patterns, the formations of the aerosols, you can see above that they're hitting it because that's higher up in the stratosphere, into the stratosphere. So you've got a layer of cumulus down below, and quite often that'll conceal what's going on above, what's being done above. So then when the cloud separates a bit or whatever, you can see that.
What was that radar 24?
Yep, Flight Radar 24. We use that specifically, but we do use another one, Plane Finder, which gives us the track for the day. So we can go to Plane Finder and say, right, ANZ 175, where's he flying today? Sometimes he'll fly through Hobart, sometimes he'll fly through Devonport, sometimes he'll fly right through the middle of Bass Strait. Most days he'll go right over the top of my house. Very rarely he'll go north of that, sometimes through Sydney. But we'll look at that and we'll go, okay, that's his track for the day. We know we're going to pick him up later on in the afternoon. And then we'll use Flight Radar 24 when he comes in at 3:15, around that time, to take the screenshot of the data. So as I said earlier, it gives us the airframe number, so we know ANZ 175 uses VH, OKB, OKJ, OKL, those 3 airframes specifically. It'll tell us he's flying at 36,000 feet. It'll give the wind speed here, how fast he's flying, all of that information that we can take, capture the photo with a time and date stamp on it, and we've got a postcard saying we caught you. That can be used later on as evidence in court of law.
You said something before about zeolite you mentioned. Does it have a chelating effect on the body or something?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of naturopaths in the group, and my understanding is that it does have a chelating effect. It's a liquefied clay, and it apparently the heavy metals attached to it and they're expunged from your system. So
it's not the stuff from Bunnings, though.
No, I don't think so, mate. I might try a food shop for that one, brother.
Bottles that are really expensive and doesn't work.
Yeah. All right. Any more questions? Any last questions? Come on, somebody's got one.
What's the lottery numbers?
They always did tonight. Yes, mate.
You're talking about the mainstream media. I'm sort of a watcher of the alternative media.
Yep.
And Nexus has been covering the issue for a number of years, and the latest edition and a few editions, recent ones, he seems to be becoming a bit of a naysayer, the editor, whereas Uncensored seems to cover with big articles on the subject.
Yeah, look, I mean, I would encourage everyone to go away from mainstream media. I mean, basically, you're just going to get fed a load of garbage, and you can go and watch X Factor afterwards if you want, sort of thing. Become an investigator and start doing research. There are non-mainstream media websites and magazines and literature that you can engage that are speaking the truth and telling the truth what it is. So, yeah, I'd encourage everyone to do that, definitely. Not just listen to the 6 o'clock news or specifically ABC radio.
I think half the problem is until people actually see it on the news, they're not going to believe it.
Well, that's true.
Everybody sees the off the beaten track, conspiracy stuff. They all think you know it straight away because
Can
you're
I
not
just
looking.
say, with that, in regards to this one here, just told me that she mentioned it, told me to start looking up, and I just started looking up more and started noticing it.
Yeah, well, that's how I've got people noticed too. If you get that critical mass, I think most people won't believe anything that's on TV, mainstream media.
Well, that's it. People are conditioned to do that. So again, and that's exactly why I'm encouraging everyone to become a sky watcher, start documenting, join in with the movement, so we can get weighted numbers, so we can get that critical mass, so we can reach that tipping point. Until we reach that tipping point, and then force that into mainstream media by our very actions. We're peaceful activists. We don't advocate violence in any way, shape, or form, by the way. Then we'll see some real critical mass reach. Yes, mate.
Before I knew about this, before Stephen told me, I was in Europe last year. I think it was Germany on the Autobahn. I was looking up in the sky. It was like a grid. Some aeroplane made a grid of about four long lines and 4 across. I think that's pretty stupid. You wouldn't fly like in a grid formation. You go somewhere, you might go, but not in the exact with a grid. And after a while, I could see it sort of spread out and just about covered the whole grid.
The grid's a classic formation because then when they hit that with some air, it'll just fan straight into a sheet, and you won't see that grid after a while. I was in Europe last year as well in June, and I was really excited to be there, but when I walked out of Heathrow Airport, I was stunned, literally stunned by the sheer scale of it, and people are just oblivious to the geocrime raging above their heads. So, again, that's why we're encouraging people to become a sky watcher. Again, encouraging people to look up. Everywhere I go, I'm always looking up, and people are going, "What are you looking at?" It's like, I'm glad you asked. So. There's a conversation everywhere. Yes,
I can tell you just a bit of a funny story.
Sure.
How I noticed is my dad, he's no longer here, but he was a trainee pilot in Britain in the war. So we grew up always watching planes and gliders and things, and I'm a school crossing supervisor, and I've always outside, in the fresh air. Because of my dad, I'd always look up. So I'd always look up at the planes and things, and that's how I started to notice, you see.
Oh,
so
and how long have you been aware? How long have you been aware?
Oh, for quite a while. Yeah, I can't tell you exactly how long, but I have been watching for quite a while.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Yeah.
The The next march against Monsanto is coming out.
It is.
I'm on the organisation committee. It would be really good to get some more information on how Monsanto is linked to the chemtrails.
Great, I need to talk to you. Been waiting. Look, we Melbourne Against Chemtrails as an organisation would like to partner with the MAN people, the March Against Monsanto people. We had Jessica Smith in South Australia. I'll send you a clip. She did a wonderful talk last year at their march in Adelaide. It was a great event. We've got a stall and a 15-minute slot with the WA people, and I'd certainly love to do something with the Melbourne march and add our weight of numbers to that, because look, we're talking about one thing here tonight, geoengineering, but if we really want to look into the apple barrel, we've got fluoride, we've got smart meters, we've got Monsanto, we've got all sorts of evils out there that are conspiring against the populace to control us and manipulate us, and that's what they want to do. So if we don't all band together as activists corporately and support each other, then there's probably not too much of a future. It's by that weight of numbers again and corporate unity amongst the activists and the movements that we'll find some tipping points and closures. Yeah, so go on, I'll talk to you after.
Probably should wind up.
Yep, all right, we'll wind it up. Final notes, just become a sky watcher, start documenting, start engaging this. Come and join us if you're on social media. Send us an email, anything. I'll plug you into our website when it comes up if you don't want to go onto social media. But yeah, just be part of the community and put your physical presence into the protests that are around, so we have some weight in numbers and people do see what we're doing and take notice. We want the tipping point sooner rather than later. We are running out of time, it's very important. We're breathing this stuff in every day. Don't think that it's not in your system, it is in your system, and it's killing people already, so I'll just encourage you to join us. Yeah. All right. Thanks for coming tonight too.